We're on lesson 4 of chapter 8, which is polynomials in factored form. First, we're going to find the greatest monomial factor. Then we're going to solve equations by factoring. Then we're going to solve a real-world problem. The property we're working with today is the zero product property, and that tells us that when a and b are real numbers, if you're multiplying a times b and you get 0, then you know that either a has to equal 0 or b has to equal 0. So for example, if I have this equation, solve x minus 4 times x plus 2, and that equals 0. If this parentheses is a and this parentheses is b, either a or b has to be 0. So what could x be to make this problem 0? Well, if x was positive 4 minus 4 would be 0. Or if x was negative 2 plus 2 would be 0. So my options would be positive 4 or negative 2. Same thing with this one. We have x plus 3 and x minus 5. This is a and this is b. One of them has to be 0. This would be negative 3 to make this 0. Or we could have positive 5 to make this one 0. So these ones actually have two different answers. Before we start solving equations, we need to be able to factor out the greatest common monomial factor. I have 12x plus 42y. So in this situation, I'm looking for any monomials that would go into both of these. Well, this one's x and this one's y, so we're kind of stuck there. But I have a 12 and I have a 42, and I know that 6 goes into 12 twice, and 6 goes into 42 7 times. So I'm going to factor out the 6 from both of these. So I'd have 6 on the outside of the parentheses. On the inside of the parentheses, I would have 2x plus 42 divided by 6 is 7y. Now I have 4x to the fourth plus 24x to the third. Here I see a couple things we could factor out. I see the 4 and 24. We could factor out the 4 from both sides there. Then I see this x to the fourth and the x to the third. If we divide both of these by x to the third, this would go away and this would become x to the first. So on the outside of parentheses, I would have the 4 and the x to the third, 4x to the third. And the inside of the parentheses, I'm left with what? This becomes 1. This becomes just x plus 24 divided by 4 is 6. X to the third divided by x to the third is nothing. So we have 4x to the third times x plus 6. So now we can solve these equations by factoring out. We have 2x squared plus 8x equals 0. Well, I see a common factor of 2 here, and I see a common factor of x. So on the outside of the parentheses, I would have 2x. On the inside of the parentheses, now I just have x over here, and then 8x divided by 2x is 4, so plus 4. And that's going to equal 0. And here's where we go back to that property. When you're multiplying a and b, and the answer is going to be 0, then either a has to be 0 or b. So if this was a, and then this was b, what can I multiply 2 by to get to 0? Well, that would just be 0. That one's pretty easy. We have x plus 4, so negative 4 plus 4 could be my answer as well. So it could be 0 or negative 4 for my answer here. Here we have 6n squared equals 15n. You'll notice on this one that there's no equals 0 over on the right side or the left side. So what we need to do is we can move this 15n over here by subtracting it from both sides. So now we have 6n squared minus 15n equaling 0. I can factor out 3 out of both of these, and I can also factor out an n. So that leaves me with 3n on the outside. Then leaves me with 2n over here. That leaves me with 5 over here. And that's going to equal 0. Well, one of these needs to equal 0. So if we were going to make this one 0, 3 times 0 equals 0. So x could either be 0. This one's going to be a little bit tougher. We have 2n minus 5 equaling 0. How can we make that happen? Well, we can write this out as an equation. 2n minus 5 equals 0. Add 5 to both sides. So 2n equals 5. Divide both sides by 2, and then there would my answer be. So it could either be 0 or 5 over 2. Those would be my options here. It's always good to have an or in there, otherwise I think you're writing about a coordinate point. So we can do the same thing over here that we did over here. We could subtract 2x from both sides. So we have 4x squared minus 2x equaling 0. We can factor out 2 out of both of these, and we can factor an x out of both of these. So my new equation is 2x on the outside. This turns into just 2x, and this just turns into 1, so minus 1. And that needs to equal 0. Well, solving for this one is pretty easy. X could be 0. 2x minus 1 equaling 0, let's do that over here. 2x minus 1 equals 0. Add 1 to both sides. That leaves me with 2x equals positive 1 divided by 2. So x could equal 1/2 as well. So 0 or 1/2. Now we have a squared plus 5a equals 0. I could factor out an a from both sides, so I'd have a over here, and then a squared divided by a would just turn into a. 5a divided by a would be 5. So I have a times a plus 5 equaling 0. Remember, in front of an a I could put a 1 if that helps me. 1 times what gives you 0? Well, that's 0. So it could be 0 or negative 5 plus 5 would be 0. So 0 or negative 5. Now we can solve a real-world problem. It says a startled armadillo jumps straight into the air with an initial vertical velocity of 14 feet per second. After how many seconds does it land on the ground? So this is what we need to find out. We're going to be using the vertical motion model to solve these ones. The height h of a projectile can be modeled by h equals negative 16 times t squared plus v times t plus s. And it tells us that t is a time in seconds that the object has been in the air. V is the initial velocity in feet per second, and s is the initial height in feet. We need to solve for the seconds, which would be t. So if we write out that model, h equals negative 16 t squared plus v times t plus s, what information does it give us? Well, it gives us the initial vertical velocity of 14 feet per second, so that would be v. So v becomes 14. When the armadillo jumps, it jumps from the ground, so its initial height in feet would just be 0. Then we need it to land on the ground, so we want it to have a height of 0. We want it to be on the ground when it's all said and done. We want to find out how long it's going to take. So we have our new equation here. We have 0 equals negative 16 t squared plus 14t plus 0. So since that's plus 0, I can just subtract that. So what can I factor out of this group right here? Well, I notice they both have a t. This one's t squared and this one's t. And these ones can both be divided by 2. So we'd have 2t on the outside. Divide this by 2t, that would give me negative 8t. Divide this by 2t, that would become just positive 7 or plus 7. So it could either be 2 times t, I need that to equal 0, so 0. Or we'd have to make this 0. So negative 8t plus 7 equaling 0. Subtract 7 from both sides. So negative 8t equaling negative 7. Divide both sides by negative 8. Negative 7 divided by negative 8 would be positive 0.875. So 0 or 0.875. So it either took the armadillo 0 seconds to land back on the ground, or it took the armadillo almost 1 second to land on the ground. And this is where you have to use a little bit of logic. Clearly the armadillo was in the air for some time, so it can't be 0. So our answer then would be 0.875 seconds.